Do me a favor and welcome those online because we got a lot of people that are sick. Apparently got a plague going around. Any of y'all survived the plague? You've been marked safe from the puke plague of 2024, 5, whatever it is. What year are we in? Can't remember. So my beautiful bride made her 40th rotation around the sun. We can say that. Today is her birthday. I got to honor her briefly in first service, and to you, just so you know, God's been very gracious to us. We've been together for 22 of those 40 years, 17 of them married as husband and wife. We started holding hands at 18, and occasionally we still get to hold hands in the front seat with the chaos that goes on behind us. The kids have tried to get us to not love each other, but most days we still do. And I said this earlier, and I'm going to talk about it in a few weeks in our marriage series that we're in, but holding my wife's hand is completely different than it was when we were 18. We've held hands and moved across country. We've held hands and expressed vows and gotten married. We've held hands while we had children. We've held hands while we've lost family and friends. We've held hands while we dealt with betrayal. We've held hands when we didn't have anything to eat because we were broke church planners. We held hands whenever we could go out to eat, but we didn't have a car to get us there. And we held hands when we walked on the night that we were going to eat. Remember when we didn't have a car for like a week and a half in California? We didn't have no money to get another one. We've held hands a lot. And now when I hold your hand, it means more. Because we've been through, like God sustained us and endured us through a lot more. And I just want you to know that I love holding your hand, and I hope I get to do it for 40 more. So I appreciate you. We're in a series called Kings and Queens. It's kind of a 90s relationship series show. I love the TGIF era TV. I don't know if y'all remember that, where Danny Tanner taught us parental values, and Family Matters with Carl Winslow and the Urkel introduced laughter and joy into our life. If you didn't grow up in my TV era, like every other generation that comes around, we want to tell you that our era was the best. But it's very true that it's actually the truth. It's the truth. We had the best TV in the history of TV, and no one's ever made TV better. It's a proven fact. Now I'm going to preach truth and open the Bible to you. But my point is, we're in a relationship marriage series. Last week we talked about starting a new marriage, understanding that at times every relationship is going to get stuck. It's going to become more difficult to be committed to the vow that you made. And the beauty of your wedding vows, it's not a statement on your wedding day of current expressed feelings, but it's a promise of future devotion. When you say on your wedding day, all gussied up, that you will, for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, to love and to cherish as long as you both shall live, you're not making that statement based off of the current feelings you have. You're making that statement because of what will come in the future. There's going to be tribulation. There's going to be trial. Your partner's going to change. They're going to become different. They're going to let you down. There's only one person that will ever not let you down. His name is Jesus, and everybody else, including your mom and including your dad, will at various times fail because they're human. You are in your relationships going to have to find a means and a way to forgive what seems to be unforgivable, to love each other through what seems to be the unlovely parts of life. You're going to have to deal with times where you're betrayed by the person that's closest to you, where you got to deal with the fact that they said things that hurt and stick and linger longer than you would like for them to linger in your head when it comes from the mouth of someone that you're married to. But instead of giving up and quitting, we encourage you to walk out the door and walk back in on the same marriage, to rebuild on the rock of Christ, to allow Him to supply you with grace and forgiveness that enables you to forgive and give each other grace at levels that you lack the capacity to give each other, to lean into Christ's love for you that enables you to love your closest neighbor, your spouse, in a way that perhaps you find it impossible in your natural ability to love them today. What I want you to know is this. In your relationships, whether it's marriage, parenting, work, leadership, there are all sorts of tools that God has given us that are not naturally given. Meaning, if you find a marriage where a couple is really good at communication, know that communication is not a gift, it is a tool. It's a tool that you can learn. It's a tool that you can grow in. It may not lead you to the place of being a communicator from a platform, but it can lead you to a place of being able to articulate your wishes, your dreams, your desires, your wants, your needs to those that are closest to you in a way that is life-giving and not demanding and demeaning. You see, you aren't just a person that either can speak or not speak, or deal with conflict or not deal with conflict, or manage money or not manage money. These are not natural gifts. They are God-given tools that you have biblical principles that teach you how to learn those tools so that you can effectively have healthy relationships. Some of you today, you struggle to communicate anything to a lot of people or to your spouse in particularly, and it's like a Cold War where it's not that you don't have feelings, wishes, or desires, it's that you lack the ability to in a healthy way articulate what you wish and what you desire and believe that it'll be received and understood. So I want to talk to you today about the tool of communication. Because you cannot have a conversation about anything without communication. You can't resolve conflict without communication. You can't forgive without communication. You can't receive forgiveness without communication. You can't figure out where you're going to go to lunch after church without communication. You can't parent without. It's hard to work if at work you don't have any. And one of the worst things that can happen in your relationships is you give up on communication with someone because it's just too hard. And perhaps one of the places we're quickest to give up on the gift and the tool of communication is our marriage relationship. So let me define what communication is for us today. Communication, by definition, is something that has not happened until the person speaking is both heard and understood by the person listening. Communication has not happened. How do you know that you have communicated, that it has happened? It's not whenever you're agreed with. That's what some of us think. Communication hasn't happened until you see it my way, until you agree with what I'm saying, until you want to do what I want to do. That is not communication, that is domination. There's a big difference between the two. And if everyone has to agree with everything that you say, whenever you say it, and go along with whatever you want to do, then you're not looking for a relationship. You're looking to be a master over a bunch of people that become your subservients. Are you tracking with me? Instead, communication is about you being able to clearly articulate desires, wishes, wants, and needs, and a person that's being communicated to hearing and understanding those needs. Not necessarily agreeing with it, but hearing and understanding those needs. That means miscommunication is something that happens whenever the person speaking is not heard because the person's not listening, is not understood because the person doesn't care to understand what's going on by the person that they're speaking or the people that they're speaking to. It's a simple definition, but it's how a lot of things go awry quick. Miscommunications lead to some of the biggest meltdowns, the biggest concerning moments in our lives. Sometimes it's comical, sometimes it's funny. I remember back in Bakersfield, my son was struggling with his pronunciation, as a lot of 3- and 4-year-olds do. And so we were having family prayer time. Anybody familiar with family prayer time? Ever attempted that? That's a scary thing. You find out a lot about your kids whenever you hear what they want to pray to God about. And so my son had really gotten to a TV show where they forge weapons in fire and make them. Any of y'all ever seen that show? And then they test those weapons out on like Jell-O mold people. He's 3 and 4 years old, and he may have been under the influence of his father's choices of TV. But we would watch them make these said weapons and then practice wielding said weapons on unsuspecting things. So I come home one day, and Luke's wanting to start a fire because he's built a forge in the backyard, and he's begun a collection of sticks. Now, my son struggles with the ST sound, and the ST sound at this point in time sounds more like the duh sound. So whenever he means to say sticks, it sounds more like duh. So you understand the problems that we have here. So Morgan had not caught on to the fact that this was happening, and we got to prayer request time, and Luke wanted us to pray for his stick. My wife did not know what he had said. She thought she had failed as a mother. I just was thinking, son, I ain't praying to God about that. That's the one thing I can. The Lord of the universe is not going to hear me pray for my. That's not happening. But luckily, we had an interpreter to translate the tongue that we did not understand, which means he was speaking in tongues correctly in the biblical way. That's funny. And my daughter looked and said, "He just wants you to pray for a stick, Dad." And to which I went, "Thank God. Thank God. Thank God." Maybe you've had a moment where miscommunication, a lack of understanding, led you into a panic, led you into mishearing, led you into a worry. Here's what you need to know. We all have a spectrum that we fall on when it comes to the way we communicate, okay? And no one is a perfect communicator because none of us are Jesus, meaning we all miss the mark at times with communicating effectively. And in general, on this spectrum of communication, we lean to one extreme or the other while trying to fight for the midpoint, which is what I'm going to teach us to try and fight for today. On one extreme, we have this thing. Some of you are still thinking about that story. On one extreme, we have this thing called passive communication. What is passive communication? A passive communicator is someone who struggles to clearly communicate their wants and desires. It's not that they don't have wants and desires. It's that it's hard for them to put words to those wants and desires. They often feel frustrated and misunderstood and don't know if they will ever be able to express what they are really thinking or feeling. For some of us, we struggle. It's not that we don't want to say it. It's just that we want to say it correctly. Passive communicators usually are internal communicators before they're public communicators, meaning if you want to know what they think, they've got to first rehearse what they think internally before they articulate what they think verbally. Am I making sense? Now, some of us, we lean towards this side. It's not that we don't have a desire. It's just when you put us on the spot and give us 5 seconds to answer, we usually struggle, right? Because we tend to be more internal processing, passive communicating kinds of people. That's not right. That's not wrong. That's how God made you. Some of us lean that way. The other side of the spectrum, on the other side of the extreme, is what I would call aggressive communicators. Aggressive communicators' favorite thing to do is communicate. They never struggle to use words. Words are their defense. If there is a moment of silence, the reason I can understand this is I tend to be one of these. If there's a moment of silence, they think that silence deserves my words. We attack silence with our words. We know exactly what we want the moment we're asked what we want, but we don't know how to communicate our desire in a non-demanding, communication shut-downing, sometimes bullying way. Then we wonder, as an aggressive communicator, especially when we're blind to it, why is no one else contributing ideas? Why am I the only one that ever comes up with ideas? Well, Thunder, I'm here to give you the revelation that it might be that the way that you're communicating is so aggressive that no one else thinks that they can get a word in. Some of us go, that are aggressive communicators, well, I asked first. And you pause for 3 whole seconds before you began to articulate aggressively what it was that you were desiring. Aggressive communicators often get their way, but can be perceived as being abrasive and not the best. Why? Why does that matter? Because communication cannot happen until the person speaking is both heard and understood by the person listening. Now, just because you're a passive communicator doesn't mean that you're a great listener, but you definitely will be challenged to be a good listener if you're an aggressive communicator, because you will hear one sentence of a 5-sentence statement and respond to the one sentence without the context of the other 4. This is the disease of the aggressive communicators. Any of you in the room? We're in a marriage series. Don't nudge your partner too hard. What's the midpoint? If aggressive is on one side and passive is on the other side, the midpoint of what we're striving for is assertive communication. Being an assertive communicator. An assertive communicator, they know how to communicate their feelings and desires, but they do it in a way that is direct but not off-putting. It doesn't shut down conversation. For instance, in a general sense, whenever you're in a group, an assertive communicator may say, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we went and got coffee? What do you guys think? What do you guys want? They don't make a statement that shuts everything down. They make a statement that leads to a question that invites conversation, and then they give silence for others to conversate in the conversation. That's assertive communication. Notice the way that Jesus communicated throughout his time on earth. oftentimes what you see Jesus going back and forth with is not statements that shut down the conversation, but questions that further the conversation. Oftentimes, Jesus would be asked a question, and he would respond with what? A question. Not because he was trying to be aloof, but because he was being, I believe, an assertive communicator. He was getting to the point by allowing people to come with him on the journey instead of him just telling them what the point was without bringing them to the point of understanding the journey. Does this make sense? So we want to be an assertive communicator. Now, you and I lean to one side of the extreme or the other. Well, how many of you think that I lean to the passive side of communication? No, I don't. I've never struggled with having something to say or wanting to say something. I struggle with shutting up. That is my plight in life. Amen? How many of you naturally lean to the aggressive side over the passive side? Okay. How many of you lean to the passive side over the aggressive side? Okay. How many of you can put your spouse at the right side of what they lean to? Right? How many of you consider the way your spouse communicates and the way that you communicate to your spouse? See, this is the process of a healthy marriage. It's not just self-identification of the way that you communicate. We love that word in our society today. It's the ability for you to not only know how you like to speak, but knowing how your spouse likes to speak and being considerate of them. You get two aggressive people, what's likely to happen whenever you have a conflict? Lots of noise. We get loud. We think the multiplication of words will lead to a quicker resolution if we just get it all out. If you get an aggressive communication with a passive communicator, one of my favorite things that will happen sometimes, the aggressive communicator says everything and feels better and thinks, I'm glad we got that out. I'm glad we can move forward. Meanwhile, the passive communicator is just now starting to answer their angers and frustrations that the aggressive communicator have let out, while the aggressive communicator is thinking, I'm so glad we're moving past that. What happens when you get two passive communicators? Sometimes, unchecked, you dismiss problems that need to be dealt with because we just don't want to ruffle the peace. Keep the peace at all costs, even if it's a fake peace that doesn't actually exist. We just don't speak about it, talk about it, or raise our voice around it. We're quiet and silent and frustrated all the time underneath the surface. You see, it's not enough to just know where you sit on the spectrum of communication. You need to know where your partner sits on the spectrum of communication in order for you to continue to grow as communicators. Now, communication has not happened to the person speaking. It's both heard and understood by the person that is listening. That's how communication works. So how do you keep healthy communication in your relationship? Well, let me give you the 6 things that kill healthy communication in your relationship, the 6 kinds of communicating that will kill communication in your relationships. And this is not just for marriage, but I'm going to put it within the context of marriage. The 6 communication killers. Number 1 is the overgeneralizer. The overgeneralizer. This kills communication. It discourages everyone around you. It's when you take one moment and you pronounce it to be the truth of every moment in the entirety of the history of life. This one frustration points to the fact that it's been the reality of all of our life, and we've always been this frustrated. It's a person that takes in a moment a statement and says something like this: you always. As if that is the consistent thing that they always do. Or you never, as if they never have deviated from the current set of behavior that they've been modeling or behaving in. What ends up happening is one moment becomes every moment. And there's a warning about this in the Bible. In Matthew chapter 7, it talks about our judgments, the way in which we judge others around us, and the way that we pronounce judgments over other people. And in it, there's a warning about the overgeneralizer. It says this: do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. How many of you like being overgeneralized? How many of you like in a moment of failure, hearing from the people around you, you always fail? This is what you always do. This is who you are. No one enjoys that kind of judgment. However, when you overgeneralize people, you judge them by a standard that you yourself would not want to be judged by. God gives us grace. God speaks into oftentimes not the person we are in our current actions, but the person that we are by His grace, mercy, and power outside of those actions. He calls us up to something. He doesn't demean us down to something. He convicts us in order to lift us. He doesn't condemn us in order to dismiss us. However, for a lot of us, through overgeneralization, we use it as a means to dismiss people that we don't want to give life to and we don't want to lift up. So what ends up happening? Well, you get back to back instead of side to side and face to face in your relationship. You roll over and you don't talk at night. Why? Because you don't want to deal with the fact that you're dealing with each other in a season where neither one wants to give grace, where neither one wants to give mercy, where either one wants to give the other the benefit of the doubt. Instead, we presume that that one moment is the defining characteristic of all moments of our relationships, and as a result, we dismiss our partner with an overgeneralizing statement. How many of you have ever been overgeneralized or been the overgeneralizer? This doesn't help a healthy marriage and healthy communication. Number two, a second communication killer is the mind reader. This is one of my favorites, and this one gets the most uh-huhs. The mind reader. The mind reader has it in their mind that because they've been together so long, that because they've been through certain scenarios so many times, that they should no longer have to tell the person that they're in the relationship with what's on their mind. You should be able to read it. Here's what we can read with mind readers. We can read bad body language, but we cannot read what the bad body language is coming from with the thoughts of the mind. We know something's wrong, and usually it means hide the kids, hide the wife, hide everybody, and get away. But what we don't know is what's actually going on in your mind. And so you're like, well, that's not fair. You should see the things I see and already know what I want you to do. That kills communication, kills marriage relationship. Whenever you think they should have to read your mind. Let's apply that to our relationship with God. Jesus says to the church in Thessalonica, pray what? Continually. Pray continually or pray nonstop, right? So we're to be consistent in our prayer towards God. Now, does God know what we need before we ask Him? Yes, He's all-knowing. He knows everything we need before we ask Him. Yet, to the church in Philippi, through Paul, he says this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, so biblically speaking, you can sit in the worry of the outcomes of your life, not knowing how they're going to be resolved, or that worry that you feel can trigger your mind to go, I'm not alone. There is a God that is here, though I can't sense Him or know what He's necessarily doing. So listen, worry can either lead you down a trail that removes peace, or it can lead you into an action that gives peace. And what we're being invited to do with the God that knows everything whenever we're feeling worried, disconnected, are you with me? Do you have it in your control? Are you working it? Is the whole world still in your hands? Whenever you're in those moments, we're encouraged. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then, the result of you, instead of assuming, well, God knows and He'll do something if He wants to do something, instead of you assuming, well, God knows what I need before I ask, so I'm not going to ask, through that conversation, you will experience God's, what is the peace? It's you knowing His presence. It's you knowing that He's with you. It's you knowing that He's not forsaken you. It's you knowing that He's at work in what you can't see His work in. That comes through communicating with Him. It exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard our hearts and guard our minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Now, I just want to submit this to you. If God, being all-knowing, knows everything, invites us and tells us that we need to communicate to Him about everything, what makes you think that your finite spouse, who cannot read your mind and does not know your thoughts and has not considered them from afar or at close, will know what you think or need? Makes sense, doesn't it? If God says, communicate with me, if God says, bring it to me, don't expect me to read your mind, then we should expect that our spouse is not going to be able to read our mind and know what we think and know what we want and know what we need. What happens when you expect your spouse to be a mind reader? Well, instead of peace, we're in this together, you're filled with anxiety. Why? Because we're not talking. You should just know what I'm talking about. You should know what I'm thinking about. Anybody tracking with me on this? So you're anxious because you're not talking, because they should just know. On top of that, you don't have any peace in the relationship. Why? Because you don't know if you're on the same page or not. You're assuming, which assumptions all begin with a donkey on them. You're assuming that they know the offense and are gleefully and internally enjoying your torment. That's the assumption. They know what I want, they know what we need, and they're intentionally doing this to inflict harm on me, to make me angry, all because they're not reading your mind. So now there's no peace, and then what ends up happening in your heart and in your mind? A full-on war. Bombs over Baghdad. We're throwing elbows and weapons. We're justifying why we're righteous and they're unrighteous. We're arguing with them in our head. We're demeaning them, and they don't even know you're fighting with them because you expected them to read your mind. One of the biggest communication killers is the expectation of finite people who do not know what you were thinking, to know what you were thinking. And no amount of time will give them the proper ESPN to know exactly what's going on in your mind. If God says, take what's on your mind that's giving you worry in your heart and bring it to me in constant and consistent prayer, then you should understand that there's going to be a need in marriage specifically for constant and consistent communication about the letdowns and disappointments, about the worries and the angst, about the frustrations that are going on in your life if you want to have a healthy marriage. A communication killer is the mind reader. A communication killer is the overgeneralizer. Number 3, a communication killer is this thing called the avoider. We tend to, if we lean on the passive side of communication, be an avoider. That's the kind of person that says everything is fine, and if you've been around someone who is an avoider, you know the word fine means not fine at all. Sometimes the worst word you can hear from someone who's an avoider is fine, because we know that fine is not fine at all. So how many of you have ever been around or been the avoider? It says this in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 5, better is an open rebuke than a hidden love. False peace is not real peace. And if you're not willing to learn how to communicate in conflict, then you cannot have a unity that is greater than the conflicts that divide you. You are going to have to figure out, not immediately when you want to necessarily. There's a time and a place where you've got to cool down, where you've got to take a deep breath, where you've got to circle back to something that you were putting on the shelf because you didn't want to discuss it in front of the crowd or the kids or whoever. But you've got to learn the art of coming forward in the goal of unity to confront the things that are dividing you in conflict. Avoidance never brings lasting unity. Avoidance never brings a vibrant marriage and relationship. Many of you, you've done this in prayer. You don't talk to God about specific things because you're afraid that God's not going to give you the answer that you would want, and it would further deject you in your spirit and heart towards God. So you avoid certain subjects with God, and in that you avoid certain subjects in marriage, and as a result of it, you have a fragile peace truce, but not a peace that's really existent in your relationships. Many people, we avoid the challenges and avoid the problems. There was a video that was made several years ago about the avoider, this kind of communication killer, and I want to show it to you. Here it is.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And
one more time.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
On. If you would just.
Don't.
It won't go away, right? That's the truth. That's what the avoider thinks. If we just avoid it, it will get better. But it's a communication killer because there can be no real unity that's made in that. The avoider is a communication killer. Are you the avoider, the mind reader, the overgeneralizer? Number 4, this tends to be the people that are on the aggressive side. This is where we err. And I call it the assassin. The assassin is a communication killer. They're the people that weaponize words thinking that those weaponed words will bring peace. It's the person that always thinks, well, if I win the argument, then I always win. I'm going to explain something revelatory to some of us in this room, and that's this. When me and my buddies get into an argument, there's a winner and there's a loser, and we move on. But in marriage, it changes. It's completely different. In marriage, you can win an argument and you still lose. You see, the point of a disagreement in marriage is this. There is something that is threatening your unity as husband and wife. That something could be financial stress. That something could be kids. That something could be a challenge that you're dealing with at work. The idea is that the husband and wife would be side to side. You tracking with me? And whenever you have a conflict, there's something that's making you get back to back. So in marriage, the goal is attack the problem to get back side to side. But what we are tempted to do by poor communication and the enemy and our sinful nature is instead of attacking the thing that's disunifying us from being at each other's side, we lob jabs over the problem and at the individual that we're meant to be side to side with. So, we have a problem with the kids. So what am I going to do? I'm going to, instead of dealing with getting on the same page with you and parenting my kids, lob insults over about your parenting style. Lob insults over about how your lack of consistent parenting is why we're here. It's going to make me feel good because I'm vindicating myself from being a contributor to the problem. It's also elevating that I care more about being right than being one with my spouse. Is this making sense to anybody in the house? So I'm lobbing over insults, and what's not getting affected? The problem. So what's not happening? I'm not coming back into a place of unity with my spouse because I'm too busy worried about being right, because that's really what I care about, instead of being one with the spouse that I've been made to be side to side with. Proverbs chapter 15. Verse 1 says this: a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. As an aggressive communicator, there have been times where I had these two little angels on my shoulder. And one showed me the path of saying something that's tough gracefully. And one showed me the path of saying something that's tough in a way that seems like fun. In a way that's like lighting a match on an open tank of gas. And for whatever reason, my flesh delights in sometimes saying the right thing the mean way. And then using words like, well, I'm just speaking it's not my fault you can't handle oh, welcome to the house, aggressive communicators. See, many of you care more about making a point than making a difference. So as a result, you tit for tat make points as if your spouse is a political candidate that you're debating. And then you wonder why you have a house that's divided with allegiances between mom and dad because they don't want to be with one over the other. It all comes from an assassin who would rather be right than be won. The assassin kills communication. Number 5, the 5th communication killer is the interrupter. This is what aggressive people struggle with. It's where I relate most well. The interrupter doesn't want to listen. They just want to interrupt. So whenever you get someone who leans to the passive side of communication that's trying to articulate their feelings, they're already struggling to get the words out, and you're too busy going, wait. So then the person that's speaking ends up sounding like this. I think we should, and no communication is happening because they can't get a word in because they're too busy being interrupted by the person that doesn't want to listen. The interrupter. Proverbs 18:13 says this. Our political system could use this. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Again, hearing the first sentence of a 6-sentence statement and responding to the first sentence usually makes us look stupid because we've not listened to the full statement of what they're saying. If you want healthy communication in your relationship, you have to care enough to slow down enough to listen, to consider. It goes on to say this in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. Sin is not ended by multiplying words. So here's what aggressive communicators think when we're in a discussion. If I speak more, then we can get to a resolution faster. But whenever you're in a place of miscommunication, it's not the speed with which the words fly that gets you to a place of being together. It's actually at your ability to slow down the speed of your words that move you forward faster. So there's a exercise. My wife and I have done marriage counseling 3 times. 2 of them by choice because it was going good, and 1 of them because it wasn't going good and we needed to work on it. So I want you to know I'm your pastor, and I recognize that for me to have a healthy relationship, we sometimes have to bring in smarter people that are a step ahead of us to help us in areas of weakness in our relationship. I have a real marriage. I lean on the aggressive side of communicating. My wife leans to the passive side of communication. We have struggled because everything in our relationship depends on us communicating effectively. And we have struggled because we're different, because it's been tough. And one of the biggest difficulties that I've had is getting over the fact that more words do not equal resolution. Sometimes it's slowing down. And one of the exercises we learned in communication, it's the stupidest, silliest thing, but whenever we aren't communicating effectively, we slow down and we use this tool where one person speaks and the other listens, and the other person that's listening does not speak until the person that's speaking is both heard and not agreed with, but heard and it's not necessarily that you agree with them, but you are hearing them and understanding them, and you confirm that before you move the conversation forward. Sometimes you've got to go slow in order to move forward as one. So what do? Well, if we're in a point where we're struggling to communicate, I take the posture of listening, and I listen to what Morgan is saying. She communicates the entirety of what she's saying without me interrupting. I have one job: listen. When she's done talking, I then say this word, which is a transitional statement that helps her know I'm going to recap what you just said and what I understand and have heard. I say this: so what I'm hearing you say is, and I begin to articulate to her what I heard. And then I end it by saying, is that what you are saying? Some of you are like, this is stupid. It works. So, you can think it's stupid and keep doing what you're doing. Or you can try something that might work that you think is stupid but might actually help you. So, you pick. It's like the guy sitting on a roof when there's a massive flood and he's praying, God, deliver me. And boats keep coming by and they're like, nah, God's going to deliver me. Nah, God's. And then they die. They go to heaven. He's like, why didn't you do anything? He's like, I sent boats. This is a lifeline for some of you. Slow down. Stop trying to speak over the top of the other and interrupt each other. Sometimes you got to slow down. So is that what you said? That gives her the chance to come back and say, yes, you understand what I'm saying, or no, and give more. Why? I need to know what she is thinking before I begin to add in what I think. I need to hear before I'm heard. Some of us, we just want to be heard and we don't care about hearing, which means communication doesn't happen often with the relationships that we have around us. You understand? The last communication killer, number 6, put it up on the screen for me, is the careless blabber. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but that's the problem. Words hurt. And some of us, we say harsh things because we want to hurt people the way that we feel hurt on the inside. A lot of my passive communicating friends struggle with this. They struggle with holding it in, and then all of a sudden what happens? You explode. And in the explosion, what ends up happening? You just start weaponizing like an assassin everything around you. All the hurt you felt, all the overlooked you felt, all of the dismissal you felt. You began to project that on everybody around you, and everyone's going, where did that come from? They were so nice. They were so kind. Well, they took in the words, and then they were careless in the explosion of the words that they spoke back. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 says this. Look at it with me. Proverbs 12, 18. Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring. Husbands, we particularly have a role in this. Ephesians 5 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, having given his life up for her, having cleansed her with the washing of the water with the word. Think about this. Your words, husband, to your spouse are to be a cleansing water that reminds her of her redeemed identity in Christ. You can be the echo chamber of the devil, or you can be the echo chamber of the Savior. You can remind them of their failure and their shortcomings, or you can remind them of their value and their identity as a redeemed daughter of the King. It is your job, husband, to speak life instead of demeaning and cutting them to death with your words. It's your job, husband, to build them up in their identity in Christ instead of remind them of their worst moments that have been covered by the blood of Christ. So we don't just blab. Blabbers gossip. Gossip divides. Gossip tears down. What we do is we speak life. We build up with our words. If we want to be healthy communicators, if we want to be God's kingdom advancers, we're going to have to communicate in a way that's assertive, a way that's truthful, not diminishing what we feel, not diminishing the truth, and not exaggerating it on the other side of the extreme. All healthy marriages require effective communication. And if you want to have a healthy relationship, you've got to learn to communicate well. Here's the good news. Communication is not something you either have or you don't. It is a tool that you can get better at. You can work on it. You can improve in it. And in it, you can become a better communicator that has healthier relationships as a result of it. In Jesus' name, our prayer team's going to be in the front. If we can pray for you in any way, we'd love to do so. If you need a relationship with Jesus and don't have one, like we talked about last week, we would invite you to begin there. The tools are great, but a relationship with Christ is foundational. It's the greatest. And if that's something you need, we'd love to pray with you. You move as the Lord leads. Let's stand. Let's sing.